this is what I have found people, I don't care if it's going from, big organization to small, small to big or whatever. When we go into a new place, we have this tendency to, want to just get in and make a mark.
Yeah.
I think just sometimes stopping, talking to people, not talking at them, but actually listening to them and
Mhm.
observing what you see, and ask questions goes a long way.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today, you get to hear a conversation I had with Cheryl Pope about working in different kinds of environments. Cheryl has worked in large corporate companies, mid sized businesses, private equity, and has coached across many more. And today, we're digging into her experiences in these different environments. So, if you are currently considering or ever wondered what it's like to work somewhere different from where you are now, you're in the right place. I think of this episode as the top things to consider or the top things to ask yourself before you make the job switch. Cheryl Pope is the founder of Carlton Human Capital and a certified leadership coaching consultant who helps individuals and organizations elevate performance through clear communication, purposeful goal setting, and accountability. Drawing on her in the trenches experience at American Airlines, Brinker International, and in private equity, and her knack for asking thought provoking questions, Cheryl tailors strategies to fit each client's unique needs. I am so glad you've joined today's conversation. It's a good one. Enjoy. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining today. I am really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, I am just honored to be invited. I love having our conversations, and I'm looking forward to having one today. So thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. I was thinking about this topic, and one reason I'm looking forward to the discussion is I've seen, I'm guessing you see as well, that so many people are still, we're just all changing jobs so much more often. And I was reading some stats on this that say we're not only just changing jobs more often, some of us are actually even changing careers more often. So just a couple stats I found from World Economic Forum. One said that American adults have had an average of 12 jobs by the time they're 55. And like I'm right in that range. So I counted up my jobs and it's actually exactly 12. So I was like, wow, that stat is pretty on point. It's like exactly 12. But they're saying that now we're not only just changing jobs, some of us are changing careers. And they expect that to increase because of all the technological changes that, a third of what we're doing now, we might not be doing in a few years. And so that's going to require us to make changes. So whether people are doing it by choice because they just want a different environment, or if they're kind of we're being forced into it because of the dynamics,
Right.
like change is afoot, I guess, in terms of people changing organizations and places they work. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing.
Oh, 100%. And I think one of my favorite lists that comes out,
Yeah.
I think they're still doing it now that I'm saying this. I don't think I've seen it in the last year or two, but I think maybe the University of Minnesota does it. And they
Mhm.
talk about like the incoming class of freshmen this year are preparing for jobs. And so basically, people that are, I'm sure people that are listening to this podcast have just dropped kids off at college.
Mhm.
These kids are going to be winding up in jobs that we don't even know exist today. And so
Yeah.
if you think about it, like AI, how transformative that has been just,
Mhm.
in the past couple of years,
Yeah.
we don't even know what the future workforce is going to look like. So it's natural that everybody's having, kind of the itch to go other places.
Hmm.
And, our existing jobs are changing. And it's so funny you give those stats as far as 12 jobs by 55, because, my dad worked for the same company for
Hmm.
28 years, something like,
Wow.
and doing pretty much the same thing. And,
Hmm.
it's just not that's not the way of the world anymore. So,
No, it's not. That does seem there's something in that that sounds so settling to me. Like I feel like I was probably born for that era more than this one, but it's just not the era we're in right now.
yeah.
Yeah, change is afoot. And like I'm also hearing from, I was sharing with you, I have several clients who are considering changes, like moving from a large company to a small company or a small company to like a private equity environment. So I think it's just interesting for all of us to consider and kind of dig in. I'm interested in hearing your perspective on working in these different kinds of organizations and even might even get some tips around how you transition, like how do you do those things well?
Yeah, no, it is interesting because, I worked for the same company, American Airlines, for 16 years. And then within that kind of realm, I probably had 15 different jobs, but it
Wow.
was the same. It's kind of like, like if you live in a house and you finally, when you get to be an older kid as a teenager, maybe you get to move downstairs to the basement and have your own
Right.
space, that kind of stuff.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So, I was still in the same house, so it felt very
Mhm.
comfortable. Then I went, after 9/11 and all these different things, I had an opportunity to leave because they had a buyout. And so I left American, and then I went to another corporation, a restaurant company. And I was there for several years, and I was laid off in 2009, I guess it was, in the height of all of the economic
Yeah.
stuff back then. And then I went into private equity. So all of these were very different transitions, and I learned some very valuable lessons
Mhm.
along the way in terms of
Mhm.
some of them really good and some of them kind of painful, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so we can talk
Mm.
as much or as little of that, because again, this is just one girl's humble opinion on sharing some of her experiences on some of these things. So
Yeah, that's good. No, and that's interesting because I imagine we probably will get into some of that, but I would imagine just, transitions when you're choosing to do it because maybe it's like, oh, that's a good buyout, that's a good deal. I want to do that. And when it's unexpected because of things like layoffs or things like that, I imagine even that the mindset you take out of that into the next can be different, just based on whether or not you chose it or not.
yeah, because at
Yeah.
the end of the day, I don't care who we are as people, we all don't like to lose control. And
Yeah.
so, when I left American, it was great because I was doing it on my own terms. I had actually signed up
Mhm.
for the program like in, I don't know, like November. They wanted me to stay longer, so I
Mm.
stayed. And on some levels, there's nothing more empowering than letting people know that you were leaving, but not leaving yet because you're like, well, what are they going to do? Fire me?
Exactly. I can do. We used to always say you can do anything on your last day. So.
Right, right. But that oh my gosh, in the middle of kind of an economic
Mm.
crisis, I mean, because that's kind of where we were in 2008, 2009, all of a sudden finding yourself without a job, that's kind of tough. Hindsight being 2020, best thing that ever happened to me. But
Mm.
as with a lot of things like that, you don't know that at the time, and it certainly did not feel like a best thing in the moment. But
Yeah, that's good though. That's interesting. You could look back on it and reflect and see how, wow, that was really good for me. That was the right thing for me, even though to your point, I'm sure, painful in the moment, but good in hindsight.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I think it's interesting because I was thinking about our conversation today when I left this, when I left home, when the company that I went to work for right out of college.
Mm.
16 years, you build a lot of relationships. You get to know a lot of people. You know what makes them tick, what annoys them, all of these different things. And you have a 16-year track record of
Yeah.
trust and relationships. You walk in the door at the new company, doesn't matter what the new company is, nobody cares, right? I
Mm.
mean, because
Yeah.
what got you here is not going to get you there. I mean, they may be like, oh, that's great. American Airlines, 16 years. That must have been really interesting. And then it's, trying to navigate and figure out the whole thing. And I hadn't really contemplated that because I'd had new jobs before, but I'd never had new
Mhm.
companies and new people and things like that. And every place has a culture. And the culture could not have been any different between an airline and a restaurant company. So,
Mm.
uh,
Okay, okay, so that's interesting. So let's get into that. Like, what are you seeing? And I know you also coach leaders across lots of different environments as well.
right.
Um, what do you just see in general about working in kind of larger versus maybe smaller, more entrepreneurial kind of organizations?
Yeah, I mean, some people like the comfort of a large organization because it's bureaucracy, structure, rules, kind of black
Mhm.
and white as far as like, okay, here's what the dress code is. No, you can't
Mhm.
wear capri pants, right? Or, I mean, I don't even know if capri pants is even a term anymore. But when I think about what people need or the big differences in that big bureaucracy piece is you're so many times beholden to the rules that you have to put in place because you're publicly traded.
Mm.
to your board of directors, because a lot of these companies have unions, right? And
Yeah.
so the union environment can tend to be the tail that wags the dog in terms of setting, policies and precedents and things like that. So very structured, very organized. Plus, when you have 40,000 people trying to accomplish something, it matters, right? If you get
Yeah.
more than one person in a room together, you have to have clarity in what they're both doing. When it magnifies to 40,000 or 100,000 people, it's just really tough.
Mhm.
So that bureaucratic aspect of things is important in those large organizations, and it can be really annoying for some people. But it also, at the end of the day, I think people want to be led and they want to know kind of where we're going. When I
Mm.
think back to some of the more entrepreneurial type organizations that I've worked with or been involved with, some people love that freedom and that agility and just the excitement of coming in and like figuring out a decision. At the top, that's great. The people that work for them
Mm.
I share that zest for life. That, you know,
Right.
so yeah, so I think the bureaucratic nature of things, and I'm using that word bureaucratic, and I'm realizing as I hear myself say it out loud that it sounds like a bad thing. I would say it's more structure. There's a fair amount of bureaucracy, but that has to exist for a reason, just to maintain order. So I don't know if that kind of addressed part of what you
Mhm.
were asking or not, but
Yeah, I mean, it even reflects my own experience, working in a very large company and then even starting this business. Like, I laughed because when you initially said the zest for life, like that's how I felt when I first started. I was like, oh, this is awesome. So much freedom. You can make so many decisions. Um, and then, after a year or two, it's like, oh my God, you have to make so many decisions. Like you realize that what you left behind in the structure and the process and, like you're saying, the bureaucracy, the rules of how to work, um, that establishes some things that allows you to be, maybe creative in certain areas, but when you have to be creative in a lot of areas, that can also be
yeah.
overwhelming. So when you were describing that, I was thinking, yeah, that kind of describes the experience I had for sure.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure you've gone through this too. Like, because when I went out on my own, because that's a big company, private equity, and now my own kind of coaching and consulting practice. Um, it's kind of like, yeah, let me introduce you to the head of IT, the head of the administrative team, the waste management department, all of the things,
Yes.
'cause it's all me, right?
Uh-huh.
And trying to wear all of those hats is exhausting because I'm also doing sales and marketing and all of
Mhm.
these things. And you know, I think somewhere between big corporate America, 100,000 people, and a party of one, you
Mhm.
have to define those roles and figure out as a leader what's important to you personally, because
Mhm.
we all go through this journey called life, and we all have these kind of epiphanies along the way as far as like, here's what I need now. Because
Yeah.
30 years ago when I first started, it was all about the title on my business card. I wanted to go back and, because this is back when we carried actual physical business cards. Um, and so, I want to go back to a college reunion and be like, hey, look at my fancy title, or, look at this
Yeah.
fancy company. And now, as I'm kind of a little bit further away from college graduation, what
Mm.
matters to me is a little bit different.
Mhm.
And, what motivates me is a little bit different. And I
Mm.
think if I were somebody, and you and I talked about this a little bit before we were getting on the call, if I were somebody that was thinking about what does the next step look like for me, I think it's really important to go through that journey and figure out, what do you like to do? What's important to you? And I think at the bottom line, what do you hate? And so
Mm.
I know for me, when I worked in corporate America, I had great mentors. I had a lot of career development. I had challenging work, lots of opportunities, and I was super motivated and super engaged. When I went to private equity, I was super challenged by the work there. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I made a boatload of money and a lot more money than I made in corporate America. I was miserable. And it has
Mm.
nothing to do with the organization I work for. It was a very engaging, ethical, moral, private equity gets a bad rap, kind of like lawyers, they get a bad rap on TV,
Yeah.
So these
Mhm.
this could not have been a better place, but it was just the motivations there was all about earning money. And
Mhm.
I'm somebody that's more about like culture and engagement, and let's make sure if we have to work, let's make sure we're doing meaningful work and things like that. And so once I realized that that just wasn't for me, and I kind of went out on my own, and I realized that money was not the main driver for me, and I started doing work that mattered to me personally, the money kind of followed. And
Mhm.
so I thought that was, as I was thinking about kind of like a life lesson that I've had, figure out what you like to do, figure out what you don't like to do. And I get the fact, listen, none of us are working because we would not rather be living on a tropical island somewhere, right?
Yeah, sign me up.
Yeah, but if you have that, you do have that choice and that ability to think through the things you want to do and how you want to do them. But you've got to have that tough conversation with yourself first. So,
Mhm.
yeah. So, and then I know we're going to talk a little bit about people probably getting wowed by the private equity, like the sexiness of it sometimes.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or later or.
Yeah, I mean that would be great because I think you're right. You have to know what you like and what you hate to your point and like what you like and hate now. Because that to your point, like what you wanted in college, what you wanted maybe 10, 15 years into your career, what you want later in your career is so different. That yeah, figuring out the right place for you now, kind of redoing that thinking and saying, okay, honest with yourself. I could see that being so important. But I'd love to, yes, tell us a little bit because I have I was mentioning, I know a couple people who are considering private equity type environment, and it definitely has a rep. And then, but not all of us have worked in those environments. So I'm curious, tell us what your perspective is on that environment.
Yeah, so it's super exciting, right? And lots of different opportunities. And so the kind of space that I lived in when I was in private equity was I worked for basically the asset management company for a private equity firm who
Okay.
the firm had investments in different operationals. They had some restaurants, they had grocery stores, they had a mortgage company, so lots of different industries
Hmm.
that the private equity firm had acquired, and they were trying to transform them, and for some of these organizations, it meant kind of kind of like you do with your crepe myrtle every year. You like cut off all the branches so it grows again. It was
Yeah.
tough work, kind of right sizing or doing some different things. And so
Mhm.
I'm giving that background just because going to work for private equity sounds really sexy and enticing, and it 100% can be. What I saw was a lot of people would come from a leadership role in corporate America and go to private equity because they'd been very successful in the operating company that they had come from. And then they go work for an operating company in a private equity standpoint. The timeline is lightning speed.
Mm.
Private equity firms are motivated. I mean, they're in the business of making money, right? And
Yeah.
so, whereas let's just restaurants, for example, let's just say that like a traditional corporate owned restaurant company may be, hey, okay, we got 12 months to figure out whether this works. In a private equity world, it could be like, okay, you got 2 months to turn this around.
Mm.
It is, it's hard to do that. I mean, I think a lot of people get lured by the attractiveness of like, oh, well, gosh, when we sell this or when we have some sort of an exit event, I'm going to make a lot of money. And that's great. Um, that doesn't always happen.
Hmm.
And so you can get very, uh, you know, wide-eyed when you see numbers on an employment agreement and things like that. And I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from doing that. It's really when you're doing your self-awareness and self-reflection, what's your risk tolerance, right?
Mm.
And so you can make good money. I would say the salaries, and at least in my experience, the salaries and the bonus potential, not just from an annual bonus, but also from a spot bonus, were a lot better than in corporate America. But it's also a different kind of work. I thought what was really interesting too is as a leader, like it's part of a C-suite leader for a company that's owned by private equity, you kind of are in what I would call that sandwich position. You're reporting up to private equity owners, but then you're also leading your company. And the company, the people who work there, most of them probably don't even know what being owned by a private equity firm means. They don't
Yes.
care. They just, this is a job, this is helping them, kind of take care of their family and do all of these different things. And so I'll give you an illustration of this. It's kind of recognizing why a private equity company owns you. So when I was at the private equity firm, we had restaurants. And so we had a very high performing restaurant in a location and it employed, I don't know, 100, 150 people. The view from the private equity owners was this was a real estate deal. It was a real estate investment because this restaurant was located on a great piece of land. Now, you think the people who are, making good tips from, selling food at a higher end restaurant think about it like that? No. Well, then the private equity firm had an opportunity. They had a buyer come in, and within 2 weeks, the restaurant was sold. And so, when you put yourself in a position like that from a leading the company, it just requires a different level of agility, of empathy, of just decision making to be able to balance what do you, and I hate using this analogy, but what do you tell the kids versus what your parents are, are expecting you to do. So it's just different kind of issues that you have to deal with. So
That is a significant difference and a significant amount of agility to your point. I mean, there's always in all companies there's going to be some disconnect perhaps between the board and what your teams want, but I think in most large companies, even mid to large companies, if you have a board, there's more alignment. It's more, this is what we want for the business, and you're going sharing that with the board, and they're maybe giving you advice on it, but there's kind of a more aligned approach across.
right.
So what you're saying, I could absolutely see the challenge in that as a leader. And if you've come from a more traditional environment where, I think about traditional environments where brand loyalty is so important, like some of the organizations you've worked with, some organizations I've worked with, that how that shows up brand loyalty in private equity is really different because it's not about from top down, it's not about brand loyalty, it's about the financials. So yeah, that's actually really different.
Yeah, yeah, and some people are really excited and motivated by that. Like I know
Yeah.
so many people that went to work for private equity because so I think it's important for me to say this because I feel like I've been like, oh my gosh, private equity is like the Death Star when you go to it. It's not that at all. I know so
Yeah.
many people
Hmm.
who have gone into private equity and they're motivated and energized and excited by it and they've stayed there and they did a great job turning around company one and got it to exit and they just went on to company two. And
Yeah.
so I think what one of the things that I realized for myself personally, like I had been, I think I'm really good at bad analogies. So here goes another one. I had been in a long-term committed relationship for 16 years when I worked for
Yes. Uh-huh.
and then I went to this restaurant company, then I went to this private equity, and I had a chance to dip my toe into, like I said, grocery stores, mortgage, restaurants, all of these different things. And I really liked kind of playing the field because I am a continual learner. I'm just curious. I love to learn about different things. And so
Yeah.
I think that's another question. If anybody who's listening to this is thinking about like doing something different, what is your appetite for change? But
Hmm.
also, do you want to go deep and know one organization extremely well, or do you get energized by learning new and different things? And
Hmm.
so, you have that opportunity, obviously, depending what kind of private equity firm you're with, right? There are huge ones, there are small ones, and everything in between. Also, what type of private equity are they trying to like take good companies and make them better? Or are they trying to do 100% turnarounds because they're
Hmm.
assets, all of the things in between? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's another good point. I think that understanding the strategy of the private equity firm you're thinking or considering is important because you're right. Because I've worked with some leaders in some organizations where it is more private equity is more the good to great. It's like we want you to become even better. So they're more invested in that organization and that brand, um, as opposed to the financial driven. Those are different metrics. Those are different, kind of different success criteria. And when you said, I've heard, so a couple of things you said reflect things I've heard in some of my experience around better compensation, kind of some intense pressure in terms of just timing on turning around things or just meeting expectations with a tighter time frame. The other thing I've heard, I'm curious about was your experience, was kind of longer hours. I don't know if you saw that or not, and maybe it depends, but that's the other thing I hear a lot.
Yeah, I think it does depend
Hmm.
because if you are in the middle of some sort of an exit or if you're looking at trying to acquire an asset, yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
there were days where it was, you know, 12, 14, 16-hour days. Um,
Okay.
but what I did not experience, and again, this is just one place, the whole kind of butts and seats mentality. It wasn't like I just need to be sitting here so I can be seen sitting here. It was you needed to get your stuff done. And because of compressed timelines, a lot of times it did require, big, tranches of time where you were working, 80-hour weeks. But they also were very, and this I think went to the culture of the place that I worked. They cared about you as a person. And if you needed to go and, watch your kid's soccer game or your child's like kindergarten graduation,
Yeah.
and, as long as the stuff gets done that needed to get done. Like I remember I had a guy that I worked with who, I was in the Dallas office and he just lived in Atlanta. And literally his daughter was graduating from kindergarten. And so we'd been working on this big deal. He took the last flight out the night before, flew to Atlanta, was there for like her 10 o'clock thing, and then was back. And I still don't even understand how he made it all work time-wise, but but he was back. And
Hmm.
part of it was
Hmm.
on him because he was just so driven and committed to the project. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it is longer hours, but it's also, I think, not feeling like you have to be in your seat.
Hmm.
Like corporate America, I think some of this has changed a lot since COVID, but it used to be like the boss would walk in and be like, "Well, where's Arlene? Where
Yeah.
is she? Is she not
Hmm.
here yet?" And now, as long as people are getting results, it's the end game is what matters. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely still hear I feel like it's better and I still hear some of that. Like if you're in an in-person environment, there's definitely still some of that like, well, I can't leave until so and so leaves or if you're gone too much, what the perspective is on that. So yeah, I can see what you're saying. Longer hours, maybe longer hours, but also more personal freedom that kind of goes with that more entrepreneurial type environment. So there could be a balance there based on the organization.
well, and I think that's also why you get paid more money because it's, you know,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They're not paying me the big bucks for nothing. It's like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, makes sense. So you've made this transition between different types of organizations and helped leaders make the transition as well. Like, what kind of leadership or other skills, traits do you think it takes to make this transition? If you were
Yeah.
doing it or coaching someone else, like what kind of things should we be thinking about?
Yeah, it's interesting because working in all these different industries
Mm,
and then with all different levels from CEOs all the way down to, just like a brand new employee. Honestly, the biggest thing that I've realized is, you know what? Everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. And
mm,
it doesn't matter what industry you're in, or what type of work you do. People just want to be respected and cared about. And so I
mhm,
think as a leader, uh, treating others with respect, whether it is the CEO or whether it is, the person emptying the trash in the restroom, right? Treat
mhm,
people with respect. Empathy is huge, especially now. Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes because you have no idea what somebody else might be going through. And also involving people in discussions or decisions that involve them. I'm not saying it's a democracy, but nobody knows better how to do the work than the people who do the work. And
Mm,
so, kind of sitting back and just observing and listening. This is what I have found people, I don't care if it's going from, big organization to small to big or whatever. When we go into a new place, we have this tendency to, want to just get in and make a mark.
yeah.
I think just sometimes stopping, talking to people, not talking at them, but actually listening to them and
Hmm.
observing what you see, and ask questions goes a long way. Because I'll recap it for a new leader, regardless of what you're going into, I think it's about respect, empathy, transparency, because information is not currency. I've realized that may be shocking for some people to hear.
Yeah.
Information is not,
Hmm.
but then humility, right?
Hmm.
And just listen to what's going on around you. I think that's a huge win, because you have to,
Hmm.
people don't know what you know and you don't know what they know.
Hmm.
You have to meet them where they are, and you can't do that if you don't observe and listen.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit of a slower, because you can absolutely, I think, have that energy going in of like, let me go in and make my mark. And going in a little too fast and hard. It's
Yeah.
just easier to make missteps, probably, to your point, as opposed to that listen and observe mode. Yeah, and what's your thought around, you said information isn't currency. Say more about your thought on that.
Yeah, I think that we tend to, as humans, a lot of the times use information as power.
Mm,
And sometimes like when I think about who I really trust as a leader, whether
mhm,
it's somebody I know as a leader or whether it's somebody I see on TV or like just somebody, trying to sell me something in a commercial or pop up on social media or whatever, like
mhm,
what builds trust? It's people who are transparent and who say, "Hey, I don't have the
mhm,
answer to this question." Because what we don't realize is when you tell me you don't have the answer to something, you're actually telling me something, right? Because if you
mhm,
just don't say anything, then I make up stories in my own head. And I
yeah,
think as leaders, we don't want to tell people what's going on, or we don't want to collaborate with our other kind of leaders in other departments because we want to look good, or we don't want to lose our budget to somebody else, or we
mhm,
don't want somebody else when performance management comes around to say, oh, well, you don't have the best performer. So if we have a reduction in force, you're going to have to like, we just don't, we just use information as kind of currency, right? Or I'll do
mhm.
this if you tell me that. And that's not the way, in my own opinion, that things should work. That actually creates more barriers than it does helping an organization move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea of choosing transparency instead. Like, it can be tempting to try to use information as currency, but that transparency is a better currency, a more trust building currency. Yeah, I can see that. For sure. What do you think? I'm curious about because I agree with the listen and observe. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking, and I know when you go into an organization really new, you do feel this pressure to deliver, perform, create early wins or some of that too. Like, how do you think people balance that? Is there a timing by which you think you're kind of moving from this learn, listen mode to, maybe more action oriented? Like, how do you think successful leaders are able to balance that?
Yeah, I mean, uh, now I'm going to sound like I could run for political office when I give you this answer.
Yeah.
It depends on the organization, right?
Mhm.
And it depends on the type of work and things like that. Command and control organizations to collaborative organizations and everywhere in between, that ramp up time is going to be different.
Mm,
And when I say listen and observe, I'm I'm not talking about like take 6 months and do it.
mhm,
Sometimes it's as little as just for your first couple of days, set up with some key meetings or just walk around and just have conversations with people, not
Mhm.
just appointments that are on your calendar. Now, depending, of
Mhm.
course, the type of environment in which you're working, but let's assume it's an office or everybody's in person. I'm
Mhm.
not talking about just the formal calendar appointments. Go into the break room, get a cup of
Mhm.
coffee, chat up the person who's trying to figure out how the Keurig works, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
just have those kind of conversations. I worked for a place years ago that we had kind of an open cube setting or whatever, where there were 4 cubes. And I had an office, and I had been out of the office for like 3 months on assignment somewhere. And I come back in, and the same 2 people that had sat out front of my office were still there, and there were 2 new people. So I walked by and I was like, "Hey, who are those 2 folks?" And they're like, "Oh, I have no idea." I'm like, "Well, how long have they been here?" "Well,
Yeah.
they've been here a couple of weeks." I'm like, I mean, I'm not even talking about cubes that have the partitions. I'm talking about,
Yeah.
like, it was literally like a big desk with 4 chairs around it. And that just was a lot culturally about that place. Like,
Mhm.
how do you, like, that's a good thing to
Mhm.
observe. What does that mean about the culture that
Mhm.
people aren't comfortable talking to one another? You know,
Yeah.
so,
Mhm.
you have to, I guess the feedback that you're trying to listen for is not just what people are actually willing to verbalize to you, but what are some of the other things you're just seeing? And if
Mhm.
you sit in your office with your door closed and
Yeah.
think, hey, I got this big new title of VP or head of whatever, you're missing out on a lot of this stuff.
Mhm. A lot you could learn, yeah, by watching the dynamics that are happening. Do you think there's any we talked about how sometimes you've made a transition that was by choice, sometimes it's like it's not by choice. As you were making that transition, was there any difference in that in terms of how you went to the next organization or what you did between time? Like, do you think of those as were there any differences there that people might want to think about based on making transitions?
Well, yeah, like when I left American and took this voluntary buyout,
Mhm.
I had money and I could, kind of chart my next course. And the environment was just a lot easier to find a job. But I
Mhm.
mean, I did a lot of projects like around the house. Like, I don't know if you remember this. Some people on this might remember this, but we used to take pictures with things called cameras. And then when you got the film developed, you could get 3 prints for the price of one, which meant that I had box loads of just
Oh gosh.
physical photos.
Behind me.
Oh, yeah.
I
Yes.
have that right now. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yes. So that was a project that I did, when I, left. I was like, this would be great. I can get everything organized and, being kind of silly when I talk about that, even though that was a real life deal that I did. But I was going to lunch. I was planning, strategically, like what I was doing. And I was talking to some people. And then I just had an opportunity fall into my lap because some people that I had worked with at American had worked
Mm,
at Brinker, and they called me and they were like, "Hey, we think you'd be a great fit culture wise." And so we just had some conversations. Fast forward several years, the economy, goes south, things are going bad, and I get laid off. Well, that's a much different approach because I don't have the luxury. Now, of course, I got a, severance and all this kind of stuff. So, they were great in terms of how that exit was handled. But then I had to treat finding a job like a job. Um,
mm,
and so I think a lot of the times people want to just kind of, you get embarrassed, right? Because,
mhm,
being laid off and getting fired are 2 vastly different things,
mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
so sometimes the position just gets eliminated. It's embarrassing to tell people that. So when it is more of a involuntary thing, look at finding a job like a job. Go out, network with people, talk to, figure out what you do want to do and what you don't want to do, right?
Mhm,
And it's a lot easier to find a job when you have a job. I'm not
mhm,
saying that you should just take the first thing that comes along, but if you are anything you can do to kind of still sharpen your skills and
mhm,
stay relevant matters, even a contract job. Right. And I personally got lucky back then just because I knew some people who worked at this private equity firm, and like literally I had seen a job posting and had thought, oh, well, that looks kind of interesting. And then I went walking around the neighborhood with my husband, and we happened to bump into this guy, and we hadn't seen him in a while. We're like, hey, what are you doing? he worked for that private equity firm. And so I guess my
Wow.
long point is figure out where you want to, what you're interested in. Don't discount your personal network. You probably know somebody who could maybe get you in the door, because I've probably ever gotten one job in my life where I just applied for it blindly without kind of, just talking to people. And that's when I went to work for American Airlines right out of college. So, um,
Yeah.
your personal networks matter. So,
Yeah, they do for sure. And yeah, I don't know why sometimes we hesitate to leverage them, or to use them. I don't know. I feel like sometimes we kind of forget. We try to just focus on the career contact or the business contacts we have without really thinking about all the people we might know personally or our families might know personally and really leveraging that network as well. But yeah, there's a lot of resource and just richness in that network, and you have a personal connection to it. So
oh,
that
yeah.
helps a lot. But that's a really good advice because I think we kind of forget about that sometimes.
Well, and don't you, Arlene, like when people come to you and ask you for something, don't you generally like helping other people?
Oh yeah. Like I literally got a note from a fellow coach. And I'd forgotten this. He sent me a note and he was like, "Hey, thanks for getting my son connected to this job at Home Depot. He's doing great. He's been promoted 3 times." This was like years ago. And I was like, I forgot I even did that. But that made me feel that like made my day. I was like, oh, he's doing great over there. So to your point,
Yeah,
most of us would respond positively if someone reached out, especially in today's job market. I think we all know it's tough. We would all
right.
respond positively, but we don't necessarily. I don't know if it's the vulnerability of it, but there's something in us that makes us kind of hesitant to leverage our personal networks, which we need to probably get over.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, honestly, what's the worst thing that somebody's going to say? It's
Yeah.
probably, I'm not sure I'm comfortable doing that,
Yeah.
and that's cool. You know.
Right. It's like fine. Right.
I know.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good advice. Welcome to Anelra. Have you ever thought about unlocking the full potential of yourself or the leaders in your organization? Imagine the impact of executive coaching. Ready to transform your leadership impact? Visit us at www.anelratalent.com. Anelra, coaching solutions that work. Let me ask you this as we kind of close out a little bit. Two things. One is, what do you most hope people take away from today's conversation if they're thinking about different environments or different roles as, we just all kind of navigate our careers? What do you most hope people walk away with?
Yeah, I think it's really, this we have a limited time on this planet,
Mm,
right? A limited amount of time.
mm,
And I go back to kind of what we started talking about, which is figure out what you want to do and what you want your legacy to be. Because we have a million different ways we can be the victim, right?
mm.
I got laid off. I have a boss that stinks, or that kind of stuff. But we also have a million ways we could be the victor. And
Mm.
so if we don't think about some of those things and what we really want to do and kind of what do we want to say? What do we want people to say about us kind of when we're gone? Like whether that's ultimately gone or just, gone from a company.
Yeah.
We don't really oftentimes, and I talk about this a lot with clients, we very rarely think about what we want our legacy to be. And
Mm.
it's, I think, an important question. So if there's one thing that people take away from this conversation, it's really just, maybe I will take 10 minutes and just think about what do I want to do and what do I want my personal legacy to be on the workforce, on the, on the committee that I'm on at this association or whatever it may be. But what impact
Yeah.
do you want to have on others? So
Yeah. Such a good starting point for thinking about what you want to do. So it's in line with whatever that might be. Okay, last question.
yeah.
What do you personally do to work well, live well, meaning create a meaningful life for yourself? Like, what's
Yeah.
something you personally do?
Well, I think it stems from where I worked for the first 16 years of my career, but my husband and I love to travel. I
Mm,
think that, just getting out and seeing the world, exploring, the world's a big place and people are super interesting if you are willing to just like engage in conversation with them, learn about their cultures, learn about the people. It helps you, I think, be a better leader, and it helps you be more meaningful in your interactions. So I think travel would be my one thing. I'd say the other thing is get a golden retriever. We have two. They're just the best thing ever. So
Do you know what? In my TikTok watching, Goldens are they're like top tier in terms of like TikTok videos because of their personalities. I don't know if I ever realized how much personality Golden Retrievers have, but
yeah.
yes, they seem like a ball of fun and also a real challenge, I'll tell you.
100%. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll at some point I'll show you the new couch we have thanks to the other one being eaten by the one when he was a puppy. But I mean, I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but when you get to come home, I don't care how horrible your day is, and I don't care if you're coming home, it's literally walking in the door from an office or like it is for me walking down the hall to the den.
Mhm.
When you just have something like
Mhm.
a dog or an animal that's just so happy to see you, you just
Yeah.
realize that, you know what, 99.9% of what I just dealt with at work is really just kind of dumb. Like it's
Mhm.
not in the grand scheme of life
Yeah.
altering. And they just kind of help center you and
Mhm.
kind of help keep things in perspective. So,
Yeah. I have to tell my husband we don't have a dog right now, but I keep considering getting one. I'm gonna tell him Cheryl said we need to get a golden retriever.
and if you do that, Arlene, get about 8,000 lint brushes, and
Oh
that's
my
all there.
God. Okay, now I no longer want a golden retriever.
A golden doodle then. So,
Oh my God. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you joining. I appreciate your insights. I think they're really good things for us to think about as we consider these different environments, consider what matters to us now, and how do we let that drive us into, the right next opportunity for us. So I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate your sharing your own personal stories and just the insights you have from your experience. So thank you so much for joining.
well, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to seeing pictures of your new puppy, whatever you wind up getting.
You do. My husband doesn't, but you do. I love that. So thank you all so much for joining the podcast. We'll put Cheryl's information, her contact information for her and her business in the show notes so you can reach out to her. But we appreciate you being here and be well. Thanks for listening to the Work Well, Live Well podcast. If you're ready to grow as a leader or as an organization, head to enelratalent.com. That's ENELRA talent.com to learn how we can support you. Like what you heard? Follow or review the show so you don't miss what's next.